Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding in Mishnah Berurah Chelik Aleph, and in this share, we are continuing Daf Yud Zayin Amud Aleph. I gave a share on the beginning of Yud Zayin Amud Aleph earlier today. That was part one, and now we're going to have a relatively short share just to finish Daf Yud Zayin Amud Aleph. We're one day behind on the schedule. I don't want to fall any further behind. We're continuing to learn Hilchos Tzitzis, so we pick up right now in Siman Tes with Siv Daled. Yud Zayin Amud Aleph, 4 lines down in the Shulchan Aruch. So, here in Siman Tes, in Siv Beis and Siv Gimel, we learned about tzitzis strings that are made out of tzemer or pishtim versus tzitzis strings that are made out of shar minim, other fabrics. So, what we have learned is, if you have tzitzis strings that are made out of tzemer rechelim, they're made out of sheep's wool, or they're made out of pishtin, they're made out of linen, then those tzitzis strings are what we have been calling universal tzitzis strings. You could affix those tzitzis strings to any beged of Dalet Kanfas, irrespective of what that beged is made out of, and those tzitzis strings will pater that beged from its obligation, the chiyuv of having tzitzits. So, for example, you have a talis cotton that's made out of cotton. You could use tzitzis strings that are tzemer or pishtim. You have a talis cotton made out of silk. You could use a set of tzitzis strings made out of tzemer or pishtim. Tzemer or pishtim are universal. However, if you have tzitzis strings that are made out of other fabrics, let's say you have a set of cotton tzitzis strings. Cotton tzitzis strings, tzemer gefen, can only be used to pater a cotton beged. So if you have a woolen beged, you have a beged of Dalet Kanfas made out of wool, you can't put cotton tzitzis strings on that beged. If you do so and you put it on, it will be as if you are wearing a four-cornered garment without tzitzits, because the cotton tzitzit strings cannot pater a woolen beged. Cotton tzitzit strings could only pater a cotton beged. Silk tzitzit strings can pater a silk beged, but silk cotton strings cannot pater a wool beged or a cotton beged. So here we have the distinction. If you have tzitzit strings made out of tzemer or pishtim, those are universal. You could use them in any type of beged. If you have tzitzit strings made out of shar minim, you have tzitzit strings made out of other fabrics, those could only pater matching fabrics. They cannot pater other fabrics. Now we go to Siv Daled, where the Mechaber gives us an interesting case. Says the Mechaber, Im hitel betalis shal shar minim, let's say you have a talis, a beged, a four-cornered beged, made out of shar minim. So, for example, you have a beged of Dalet Kanfas made out of tzemer gefen, made out of cotton. So, im hitel betalis shal shar minim, ktsas tzitzis miminoi, we know that when you put tzitzis on a beged, how many strings do you need? You need 4 strings on each corner, right? We put the strings through the beged, we double it over. 4 strings doubled over gives us 8 hanging strings. So you have your cotton beged. It's a beged shel shar minim, and now you're putting in tzitzits. And what kind of tzitzits do you put in? Ktsas tzitzis miminoi. You took some cotton strings, so some strings that match the fabric of the beged. Uktas mitzemer oy pishtim, and then you put in the remainder of the strings that were made out of tzemer or pishtim. So again, you had a cotton four-cornered beged, and you know that tzemer upishtim, woolen or linen tzitzit strings, are universal. Okay, so you start rummaging around in your drawer looking for tzitzis to put onto this cotton beged, and you find 2 strings of wool. So, okay, I have 2 tzemer tzitzit strings. Great, those are universal. I could put them into a cotton beged, but you can't find another 2. I'm talking about for one corner. Obviously, for the whole beged, you need 16 strings, right? You need 4 times 4. So you need 16 for the whole beged. But I'm talking about one corner. So you go to put tzitzis on that corner, and you found 2 woolen tzitzis strings, but you can't find any more. Then you find 2 cotton tzitzit strings. So you say to yourself, oh, beautiful. I have 2 cotton tzitzit strings. No problem. That matches the beged. I'm trying to put tzitzits onto a cotton beged. So I have 2 matching, and then I have 2 tzemer, woolen tzitzit strings. Well, tzemer is universal. So perfect. I have 4 strings for this corner, 2 made out of tzemer, and 2 made out of cotton. That's the scenario that the Mechaber is giving us here. Let's read it again inside. Im hittel betalos shel shar minim, if you affixed to a talus that was made out of other fabrics other than tzemer upishtim, ktsas tzitziyos miminoi, you used some tzitzis strings that are matching, some tzitzis strings that are made out of the same fabric as the beged, uktsas mitzemer upishtim, and then you used some tzitzis strings that were made out of wool or out of linen, universal strings. Says the Mechaber, yesh lihistapek pai, there is room for doubt whether or not this is effective and whether or not these mixed tzitzit strings can pater the beged. Let's take a look here in the Mishnah Berurah. Is cutting you dalid. Yesh lihistapek. What is the doubt over here? Explains the Chavetz Chaim. Ki ein kan min knaf. Let's remember, what is this based on? That tzemer and pishtim are universal, and matching is not universal. This goes back to the mimer of Rava in the Gemara in Menachos Lamed Tes Amud Beis. Rava had a steer in the psukim. Rava said, on the one hand, we have a pasuk that says tzitzis hakonof. Well, tzitzis hakonof implies that the tzitzits have to match the konof. They have to match the beged that they're going on. On the other hand, we have a pasuk that says, "Lo yisel bashatnes tzemer upishtim yachtav gedilim tasalacha." Tzemer upishtim yachtav, tzemer and pishtim gedilim tasalacha. You should make gedilim. You should make tzitzits for your beged. The implication over there is that tzemer upishtim could be used in anything. So said Rava, there you have the distinction. Tzemer and pishtim are universal. Other minim are tzitzis hakonof. They have to be matching to the beged that they are placed on. Over here we have a mixed bag. Says the Mishnah Berurah, that doesn't work. Why? Ki ein kan min knaf. What are you doing? You're putting woolen tzitzit strings into a cotton beged. Well, that does not fulfill the pasuk of tzitzis hakonof. You don't have tzitzits that match the fabric of the beged. V'gam gedilim tasalacha mehem einom legamri. But you're also not fulfilling the pasuk of loisil bashatnes tzemeru pishtim yachtav gedilim tasalacha. You're not using a full set of universal strings. You're not using a full set of tzemeru pishtim. You're mixing tzemeru pishtim together with min knaf. Says the Mishnah Berurah, that's why the Mechaber says we don't know if that works, because you're being inconsistent. You're not being mekayim either pasuk. If you would put in tzemer tzitzit strings or pishtim tzitzit strings into a cotton beged, so then I'll point to the pasuk of tzemer pishtim yachtov gedilim tasalecha. You're fulfilling that pasuk. If you would put in cotton strings into a cotton beged, I would point to the pasuk of tzitzis hakonof. Your tzitzits match the konof. They're matching. But if you have a mixed bag, you're not being mekayim either pasuk. Therefore, the Mechaber says, yesh lehistapek. There's room for doubt whether or not that works. Continues the Mishnah Berurah here, a nice cut in Yudalid. V'ayin b'artzes achayim. He points us to the Sefer Artzes Achayim. Shekosav writes, Dem oise shnei chutim miminoi u'shnei chutim mitzemer shaperdami. Sefer Artzes Achayim says, if you have 2 of cotton and 2 of tzemer, that would work. Ayin Sham Milsa B'Taima. And if you take a look over there in the Artzes Achayim, he explains his rationale, and we're not going to go into that now. Okay, we move on to Sif Hey, 2, 4, 6 lines up from the bottom in the Shulchan Aruch. Says the Mechaber, Yesh Oimrim. There are those that say this is a Rambam. Yesh Oimrim shetzarech lasois hatzitzitz mitzeva hatalis. Very interesting. The Rambam says that the tzitzits should match in color to the beged. And the Mechaber, who so often follows the psak of the Rambam, the Mechaber says that indeed the medaktikim are noyig that way. They match the color of the strings to the color of the beged. Says the Ramah Haggah, for Ashkenazim ein noyig in lasei tzitzis rak levanim af bebegadim tzevuim. Says the Ramah that the Ashkenazim are noyig that tzitzis strings are always white. Even if you're putting tzitzis strings into a colored garment, the tzitzis strings themselves are always white. And the Ramah concludes the ein l'shanois, and you should not change that minig. Says the Mishnah Berurah Cotton Tesvav Mitzeva Hatalis. The Rambam says that the tzitzis strings should match the beged in color. Says the Mishnah Berurah, why is this? Mishum ze keli va'anveyu. We know that the pasuk in Shira Layam, ze keli va'anveyu. One of the ways to understand pshat in that pasuk is ze keli, this is my God, va'anveyu, and I will beautify him. And Chazal say, what does that mean? Hisnaya lefanav b'mitzvahs. We should make mitzvahs beautiful. We should have a beautiful esrig. One of the things that Chazal say is esrig na, talis na. We should have a beautiful talis. Says the Chavetz Chaim, that's why the Rambam suggests the strings should match the talis, because that is beautiful. It should be a matching set. The Yesh Mefarshim, however, others say that there's a different reason. Mishun de be'inon bezeh min hakonof. This is something that we just mentioned before. The pasuk says tzitzis hakonof. The tzitzis should match the konof. They should match the corner of the beged that they're being placed on. And that's why the Rambam says that the colors should be the same. So we have two reasons. Either zekeli v'anveyu or tzitzis hakonof, that the tzitzis strings should match the beged. However, the Ramah said that that's not the minig of the Ashkenazim. The minig of the Ashkenazim is we always use white tzitzis strings, even in a colored garment. Ois cotton tezayin, af begadim tzivuim. Mikamokim, nevertheless, says the Chavetz Chaim, royal medaktek lasois dafka arba kanfei soitalis cotton lava. The Chavetz Chaim says that those who are careful in their performance of mitzvahs, a medaktek, should make sure that he has a white talis cotton and a white talis. That way the white tzitzis that the Ashkenazim use will match the beged. So the Rambam said the tzitzis strings should match the beged. The Ramah said the minig of the Ashkenazim is only to use white tzitzis strings, even in a colored talis. So you have a blue talis, you use white strings. Says the Chavetz Chaim that medaktikim should make sure that they use a white beged for the talis and for the talis cotton. That way the white tzitzit strings will match the beged. This way we're being yoitza all the shitas. We're using white strings, the meaning of the Ashkenazim, and we're putting it on a white beged. So we yoitza the Rambam also. Gam, another reason for this is, says the Mishnah Berurah Mishum Diksiv, because the pasuk in Daniel says, Ulevushe ketlag chivar. It's talking about the Navi had a mare, a vision, where Kaviyachal he saw the Shechina, and he said, Ulevushe, and the garment was ketlag chivar, like a white garment. So therefore, we wear a white garment, the beged of mitzvah that we wear, of the talis. The assumption is that if the Navi saw a mare of the Shechina Kaviyachal wearing a beged, what was the beged? It was a talis shel mitzvah, and it was white. So we make our talisim white. Continues the Chavetz Chaim, Umashe svas ha-beged ke'ein tcheles betalisa ishalanu. Did you ever wonder why we have black stripes on our talisim? Why we have a black stripe so often on the talis cotton? That's a zecher for the tchelis. It's a remembrance that tzitzis is really not supposed to be pure white. It's supposed to be white and another color, and a dark color, because according to the Rambam, tchelis was a very dark blue. That's why we have a black stripe on our talis cotton and on our talis gadol. Says the Mishnah Berurah, this that we put a colored stripe on the talis gadol and on the talis cotton, so you might say, maybe that's a problem. Chavetz Chaim just finished saying that we should be medaktik to have a white talis, so why do we have a black stripe? Basar ikar beged as linon. The answer is that that's not problematic because that's only a stripe. We go after the ikar of the beged, and the ikar of the beged is white. Moving on to Sivav, 4 lines from the bottom in the Shulchan Aruch. So far we have seen that you could have a beged, you could have a talis made out of wool, you could have a talis made out of linen. According to the Mechaber, it's only those 2 types of garments that are chayiv in tzitzis b'daraisa. You have a beged made out of cotton, it's chayiv in tzitzis b'darabanan, but not b'daraisa. That's according to the Mechaber. The Ramah holds, no, all talesim are chayiv in tzitzis b'daraisa. You have a beged that has 4 corners, it's obligated in tzitzis b'daraisa, irrespective of what kind of fabric it's made out of. Wool, linen, cotton, silk, all chayiv midaraisa. We've also seen that tzitzit strings made out of wool, tzitzit strings made out of linen, those are universal. You could place those into any kind of 4-cornered garment, and you are mekayim the mitzvah of tzitzits. Tzitzit strings made out of a different fabric, those could only be used in a matching fabric. So tzitzit strings made out of cotton, you could use them in a cotton beged, but you cannot use them in a woolen beged. We also learned earlier in Sif Beis that while it's true that woolen tzitzit strings and linen tzitzit strings are, so to speak, universal, but the Mechaber told us that there's a catch. And that is that nowadays when we do not have tchelis, right? Nowadays when we make all of our tzitzit strings white, we don't have tchelis strings, we're not mekayim the mitzvah of tzitzis b'shleimusa. We're not mekayim the mitzvah really in the full, proper way that the Torah commands us to. Therefore, there's a practical nafkamina lahalacha. That is, when we had tcheles, you would be allowed to put woolen tzitzit strings into a linen garment, even though that creates shatnez. Doesn't matter. Since you're being mekayim the mitzvah of tzitzis b'shleimusa, you could even put linen tzitzit strings into a woolen garment. You could put woolen tzitzit strings into a linen garment. But nowadays, so in the day that we had tchelis, woolen tzitzit strings and linen tzitzit strings were truly universal. They could be used in any kind of garment. Nowadays, they're not truly universal. Why? Because we can't use woolen tzitzit strings in a linen garment, because that would be shatnez. We can't use linen tzitzit strings in a woolen garment, because that would be shatnez. And we can't use shatnez when we don't have tchelis. That's what we learned until now. Now in Sivav says the Mechaber like this. Yesh Omer. There are those that say, and this is brought down in Gemara in Menachos Mem Amud Aleph, this is a sheet of the Rabbeinu Tam. Yesh Omer. She'ein lasois talis shel pishtan. The Rabbeinu Tam holds that we are not allowed to make a linen talis. Now, where's Rabbeinu Tam coming from? So, a little bit of a background. The Gemara in Menachos says that there is a gzera that we do not use linen tzitzit strings. Question, machlokes amongst the Rishonim, is precisely what does that mean? Rabbeinu Tam holds the fact that we don't use linen tzitzit strings means that we cannot even, well, one second, I think what I just said is a misnomer. Let me check very carefully. Hold on. Actually, the Gemara says, no, let me back up. I don't want to misquote the Gemara in Menachos. What the Gemara in Menachos says is like this. The Gemara in Menachos says that there's a gzera. There's my Menachos Gemara. Menachos Gemara. Sorry, bear with me here for a moment. I like saying things accurately. Okay, this is what the Gemara in Menachos actually says. The Gemara in Menachos says that there was a gzera that you're not allowed to put tchelis, tzitzis strings, into a beged of pishtim. into a linen garment. Let's remember, tchelis is not only a color. We used to think of tchelis as a color. Tchelis is blue. But tchelis is not only a color. Tchelis is blue wool. So tchelis strings are always wool. The Gemara in Menachos says that there was a Chachamim made a gzera not to put tchelis strings onto a linen beged. Why? Because if you put tchelis strings onto a linen beged, you're creating shatnez. You're taking woolen tzitzis strings, you're attaching them to a linen garment that creates shatnez. Now wait a second, Rabbi Weiss. Didn't we say earlier, we said it in the previous year, we said it in this year, it was a beferish of Mishnah Berurah. Mishnah Berurah is cut in Zion earlier in the page. We said shatnez is no problem if you're being mekayim the mitzvah of tzitzis b'shleimusa. So what's the problem? It's okay. You're allowed to have tchelis. You're allowed to have shatnez in a perfectly configured garment with tzitzis. If you have tchelis, you're being mekayim the mitzvah b'shleimusa, shatnez is okay. True. But the Gemara in Menachos was concerned for a different problem. The Gemara in Menachos was concerned, let's say you're going to have a beged of pishtan, a linen beged, and you're going to put tchelis strings onto that garment. Now you're going to have shatnez. You walk around during the day, there's no problem. You're being mekayim the mitzvah of tzitzis b'shleimusa, and the fact that you're wearing shatnez, you get a pass. The Torah Kedosha tells you, for tzitzis, you're allowed to. But what happens if you continue wearing that beged at night? Let's remember, we had a sif cotton already in Siman Ches, halon b'talisoi b'layla. Somebody sleeps in his talis cotton overnight. Does he make a bracha the next morning? We said yes, he makes a bracha the next morning. What happens if a person goes to sleep in his talis cotton and his talis cotton has shatnez? Laila lavs man tzitzits. Laila is not a time for tzitzits. And according to the Rambam, that means even if you're wearing a beged shel yoim, but during the night there is no chiyuv of tzitzits. That means that at night, if you're wearing a talis cotton that has shatnez in it, you're wearing shatnez at night, shaloi b'makom chiyuv, when you don't have a chiyuv of tzitzits. Then you don't get a pass on shatnez. You're not allowed to wear shatnez at night if you don't have a chiyuv of tzitzits. So therefore, the Gemara in Menachos said, there's a gzeras chachamim that you cannot put tchelis strings on a talis shel pishtan. That's the Gemara. The Rishonim come along, and it's a machlokes Rishonim, how to understand this gzera. The Rabbeinu Tam holds that once the chachamim made a gzera, that you're not allowed to put tchelis strings on a talis shel pishtan, what that gzera really meant was, you're not allowed to make a talis of pishtan. Why? Because if you make a talis shel pishtan, then we're afraid you're going to put tchelis strings on it. And if you put tchelis strings on it, we're afraid you might wear it at night. And if you wear it at night, you're going to be over on shatnez. That's how Rabbeinu Tam learns the Gemara in Menachos on Daf Mem Amud Aleph. Says the Mechaber, therefore, paskening like the Rambam and paskening like the Rabbeinu Tam, says the Mechaber, Yesh Oimrim, there are those that say, She'ein lasois talis shel pishtan, that you're not allowed to make a talis of pishtan. Now I said that the Rambam, that the Mechaber paskins this way, he does not. Says the Mechaber, V'af al pi she'ein halacha kein, even though we don't paskin like this Rabbeinu Tam, Yirei shamayim yetze es kulam, somebody who is your shamayim should be yotze all the shitas, v'ois talis shel tzemer rechelim, and he should make a woolen talis, a talis made out of sheep's wool, shehu chayiv b'tzitzis ben HaTorah b'li pikpuk, which is a beged that is chayiv in tzitzis b'daraisa, without any shilas. Don't make a cotton one where we have a machlokes whether or not it's chayiv b'daraisa or not. Don't make a silk one. What do you mean? Silk? No, don't get involved in machlokes. Don't make a pishtan talis. With Rabbeinu Tam holds you're not allowed to make a pishtan talis. Make a wool talis. It's chayiv in tzitzis v'daraisa l'kulei alma. Make woolen tzitzit strings. You're yoytza l'kulei alma and zehu. Says the Mishnah Berurah cut in Yud Zayin. Shel Pishtan. We have this Yesh Oimrim de Rabbeinu Tam that you don't make a linen talis. Says the Mishnah Berurah, why? The Gazer Chazal, because the Chazal made a Gzera, because if you're going to make a talis out of Pishtan, Mishum da Aziyah Muchrich Lachsis by tzitzis shel Pishtan. First of all, if you have a beged that's made out of Pishtan, right away you're going to make Pishtan tzitzis strings. Why? Because you're not going to make woolen tzitzis strings, assuming you do not have tchelis. You're not going to make woolen tzitzis strings. You have no heter to put wool tzitzis strings into a linen beged without tchelis. Without tchelis, you're not being mekayim the mitzvah tzitzis b'shlei musa. So certainly, if you do not have tchelis, you cannot put woolen tzitzis strings into a linen garment. So you made a linen talis, you're going to have to make linen tzitzis strings. V'yesh lachush, then we have to worry. Now so your friend is going to come over to you and he's going to say, oh, you're making new tzitzis? Guess what? I have some tchelis tzitzis strings. Ooh, v'yesh lachush shem yasa b'gam kein tchelis. Now, maybe you'll get tchelis strings and you'll put wool strings on this beged of Pishtan, the heavy Issa Kalayim, and now you're going to create shatnez. That's no problem. Hold it. If you have white strings and tchelis strings, you get a pass on shatnez. Yeah, but the problem is, kishe yiskasa boy balayla. Problem is, what if you wear this talis cotton overnight? Then you have a problem. Sha'az ein zman kiyam mitzvah, because then you're wearing shatnez when you're not being mekayim the mitzvah of tzitzis. V'afte bizmanenu ein lanu tchelis. Now you'll tell me that this argument doesn't hold water nowadays, because nowadays we don't have tchelis. So, since we don't have tchelis, if you have a linen beged, you're going to make linen tzitzis strings, because you know you can't put in woolen tzitzis strings. That would be shatnez, which you can't do without tchelis. So you have a linen talis, you're going to make linen tzitzis strings. And no one's going to give you tchelis, because we don't have tchelis. So you'll have a linen beged with linen tzitzis strings. What's the problem? Svira lahu, these shitas hold, to become mokayim ein gzera b'tela. Since the Chazal made this gzera in the time of the Gemara when they did have tchelis, so at that time the Chazal made a gzera that you're not allowed to have a talis of Pishtan because it is gzera. That gzera didn't go away, so no talis of Pishtan even nowadays. The Mishnah Berurah says many paiskim are matir this. This svira lehu dikra gzera lo yarak shelo yatilu by tchelis kidei shelo lavi ledeklayim. Many argue on the Rabbeinu Tam. The Rabbeinu Tam holds that part and parcel of this gezerah was no talis of Pishtan. Other Rishonim disagree. The Rif, others, they disagree with the Rabbeinu Tam. They hold that wasn't the gezerah. The gezerah never was the inala to make a talis of Pishtan. The gezerah was, if you have a talis of Pishtan, you're not allowed to put in tchelis. But you want to make a talis of Pishtan, or you want to put on Pishtan tzitzis strings, those Rishonim hold that that's okay. There was never a gzera against putting pishtan tzitzis strings. V'gam debizmanenu like a tchelis leishayach klalach gzera. So many argue on the Rabbeinu Tam. They hold that that was never the gzera. And certainly nowadays when we don't have tchelis, there's no room for the gzera. What's the problem going to be? And that's why we're going to see the Ramah says that nowadays if there's a shasat chak and the only talis that you could get is a linen talis, you could use a linen talis with linen tzitzis string. Let's see the Ramah, 2 lines to the bottom. Haga umiu im ef sharak b'talis shel pishtan. If the only talis that you could possibly get is a linen talis, mutav sheyase talis shel pishtan v'tzitzis shel pishtan. So it's certainly better that you should wear a linen talis with linen tzitzis strings. Mishayis batel mitzvah tzitzis. Better do that than mimavatel the mitzvah tzitzis lagamri and not wear tzitzis. Says the Mishnah is cut yudches talis shel pishtan. The choshke the mutal lasis talis shel sharmin v'tzitzis shel pishtan ki shein lo tzitzis acherim. Certainly, what if the only talis cotton that you could get is a silk talis cotton, and the only tzitzis that you could get are tzitzis that are made out of pishtan? Okay, so we said that tzitzis made out of pishtan are universal. We learned in the previous year that lechatchila we don't use pishtan tzitzis strings at all. We saw different reasons for that, but b'shas chak, if that's all you have, that's fine. Ice cutting your test v'tzitzis shel pishtan v'yuchal lisbay chalamatirim gam le'inyan bracha. When it comes to this shaila, you're even allowed to make a bracha. If you only have a linen talus with linen tzitzis strings, even though there's, according to the Rabbeinu Tam, there's a Gzeres Chachamim that you shouldn't use it. So it's funny to say Asher Kiddishanu b'mitzvaysav etzivanu, but no, the Mishnah Berurah says that you could be saimich on the matirim, even to make a bracha. Upashut, however, it's obvious. If you have a regular woolen talis gadol that you're going to put on in shul, and the whole shiloh that you have here with the linen is only for the talis cotton, so then Yavarich alav, make the bracha on the woolen talis gadol in shul, v'yechav liftar ezeh, and have kavana to be pater the talis cotton of linen with the bracha on the talis gadol of the Magen Avram kasav v'dirali diyasa by kanfay shel or v'yato by tzitzis tzemer. The Magen Avram has a different eitzah. He says if all you have is a talis of linen, you know what? Make leather corners, and then put woolen tzitzits on the leather corners. That way you have no shotness issue. And maybe we will discuss that in greater detail in the next year. We'll see if we have time for it. Okay, I'm happy we finished the page. Thank you so much for joining me for Limud HaTorah. Discussing Limud HaTorah should be made in Agas Klal Yisrael. The Roman should say Yeshua's for us, pronounce it Shidduchim to all of the need, and we should be zeichet to see the Bias Goyel Tzedek B'Meher V'Yameinu Amen. Be well.